Hi, this is Jennifer from Read It Again. Join me while I read the second half of the Cobble Street Cousins Special Gifts by Cynthia Rylant, illustrated by Wendy Anderson Halperin. Please consider subscribing, and if you enjoyed this book, hit the like button and share this video with all your friends. The Cobble Street Cousins Special Gifts by Cynthia Rylant, illustrated by Wendy Anderson Halperin. Part 2. Mrs. White settled herself in a wicker armchair near the trunk as the cousins opened the lid. "I'm so happy for your help with this," said Mrs. White. "Bending is rather difficult for me." "Oh, we like it, Mrs. White," said Tess, "and it's easy." "Well, I do thank you," said Mrs. White. The cousins had already helped Mrs. White with a large number of loose old photos. They were now nicely displayed in a new album with little notes describing what or who was in the picture. Today, the girls would help Mrs. White sort her old letters. Some were tied up in bundles. Others were loose and scattered. All were yellowed with time. "I saved letters from only 2 people," said Mrs. White. "My husband and Mrs. Roosevelt." "What was your husband's name?" asked Rosie. "Did you say Mrs. Roosevelt?" asked Tess. Mrs. White smiled. "My husband's name was Charles," she said, "and yes, my friend was Mrs. Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt." "Oh my gosh," said Tess. "I saw a movie about her. She was famous." "Yes, she was President Franklin Roosevelt's wife," said Mrs. White. "Was your husband handsome?" asked Rosie. "Rosie, aren't you interested that Mrs. White was friends with Eleanor Roosevelt?" Tess asked in exasperation. "I am more interested that she was married to Charles," said Rosie. "I love the look of old letters," said Lily, running her fingers over an envelope. "I save letters in my wicker trunk." "Oh, yes, save your special letters, dear," said Mrs. White. "When you are as old as I am, you will open them, and it will be like reading a novel about someone. So many small, wonderful memories you will have forgotten." "That's why I've kept Eleanor's letters," Mrs. White smiled. "No matter her place in history, she was my friend, and I love having her voice in my trunk." "Voices in the Trunk," said Lily. "What a perfect title." "It will be years before I grow up and get really good letters from people," said Tess. "Well, you could keep a diary," said Mrs. White. "You can be your own voice for now." "A diary," said Lily. "We cousins should keep a diary together of our year in Aunt Lucy's attic." "Okay," said Rosie. "Great," said Tess. On their way home from Mrs. White's house, the girls stopped at a stationery shop and put their money together to buy a small blue diary. "We'll call it the Blue Book," said Lily. That evening in the playground, dressed and ready for bed, the girls opened up the book and wrote on its first page, "My name is Lily. I am 9 years old and I love words. Tonight we baked fresh bread with dinner and I called it celestial. Aunt Lucy said that was a perfect word. I'm Tess. Today I wore my red velvet beret, which makes me look European. I love to sing." "This is Rosie. Our attic is beautiful. It has a high ceiling and a stained glass window, and we can see the lights downtown at night. I love it here. Goodbye." "Goodbye?" said Tess. "It sounds like you're leaving home." "Oh," said Rosie, "maybe I should have said, 'Go in peace.'" And Lily and Tess giggled and giggled while Rosie smiled. Chapter 4, Solstice Supper. "Michael has invited all of us to his apartment for winter solstice," said Aunt Lucy as she handed out carrot muffins the next morning. "What's winter solstice?" asked Tess. "It's the first day of winter and the shortest day of the year," said Aunt Lucy, now passing around boiled eggs. Michael says he likes to celebrate it with thick, earthy food and cider, a bit like animals fattening up for the cold. Ugh, said Tess. I hope he isn't going to serve worm soup. And grub bread, giggled Lucy. And beetle bonbons, added Rosie. Everybody laughed. I promised to tell him not too earthy, Aunt Lucy said, smiling. We should do something for Michael, too, said Lily, leaning down to pet Elliot, who had just walked in. Like a winter solstice reading. And a winter solstice song, added Tess. How about pastry puffs? Asked Rosie. What kind of song is that? Said Tess. It's not a song, silly. I mean real pastry puffs, said Rosie. I could bake some. I saw them in a magazine. All of those things sound wonderful, said Aunt Lucy, refilling juice glasses. I'm sure Michael would love it. Great, said Tess. I'll start thinking of a song. And I'll write some good read-aloud poem, Lily said. Something snowy. And I'll visit Mr. French, said Rosie. At Mrs. White's house that afternoon, the cousins told her of their invitation to Michael's dinner. Would you like to come with us, Mrs. White? Asked Rosie. I'm sure you'd be welcome. Thank you, dear, but I try to stay indoors when the weather turns cold. My age, you know, said Mrs. White. Do you mind staying inside all the time? Asked Lily. She was sewing the last few stitches around a pretty ivory pillow. No, surprisingly I don't, said Mrs. White. I have so much to think about. 90 years' worth, said Rosie. Mrs. White smiled. Yes, she said. I'm rather like the old cat across the street who sits in the window all day. She's probably thinking about all the mice she caught, said Rosie. Mrs. White smiled again. You girls go on to Michael's and have a good time. And please tell him hello for me. We will, Tess promised. And as promised, when Michael opened his apartment door on the evening of winter solstice, the first thing the cousins said in unison was, Mrs. White says hello. Michael gave a slight jump, then grinned. Did she say it that loud? He asked. That was me, said Tess, stepping through the door. Singers have to project. Well, tell her hello back, will you? Said Michael. Sure, said Tess, and I'll tone it down next time. Aunt Lucy handed Michael a small package. Something for winter, she said. I have something for you too, Michael answered. I have something for each of you. You got us presents? Asked Lily. We didn't know about presents. We didn't bring you anything. I thought you brought me a poem, said Michael. Oh, yes, I did, said Lily. And I thought you brought me a song, Michael said, looking at Tess. Definitely, she answered. And Rosie, said Michael. I sure hope those are pastry puffs in that pan. Lily grinned. And they're delicious, she said. Well then, said Michael, you've brought presents after all. And besides, mine for you are quite small. Can we open them now? Asked Tess. Lily poked her for her bad manners, but Tess just grinned. Let's eat first, said Michael. The stew's just ready. Okay, said the cousins. They hung up their coats and followed Michael and Aunt Lucy into the dining room. Wow, said the cousins. At the end of the long table, Michael had placed 2 candelabra full of gold candles flickering in the dim light. The table itself was covered with a paisley cloth and large white plates and mugs and gold-plated silverware. And the table's center was a beautiful topiary tree in the shape of a rabbit, said Lily, who loved rabbits. It's a hare, actually, said Michael. It seemed to remind me of snow and survival. I love it, said Aunt Lucy. It's one of the prettiest things I've ever seen. It's yours, said Michael. I made it for your shop window, if you like. Michael, really? Said Aunt Lucy, grabbing his hand. Oh, thank you so very much. I do love it. How long did it take you to grow the tree? Asked Rosie. Well, I started it quite small about 5 years ago, said Michael. You didn't know then that you would meet us someday, said Rosie with a grin. No, said Michael, but I hoped it. He blushed and glanced at Aunt Lucy. Suddenly, Rosie's stomach growled. She grabbed it as everyone laughed. I think that was the dinner bell, said Michael. Let's eat. Everyone sat down and Michael dished out the warm, earthy food he had promised. Hot chicken stew with potatoes and carrots, baked acorn squash drizzled with melted white cheese, thick slices of farmer's bread spread with butter, and warm rice pudding. This is all so good no one will want my pastry puffs, said Rosie, taking another slice of bread. Don't count on it, said Michael. I'm reserving a space just for that. Me too, said Tess. Tea and a puff will be perfect after this good meal, said Lily. Let's do the poem and song right after dinner, said Rosie, and then we can have dessert. Great, agreed Michael. The girls helped Michael and Aunt Lucy carry all the dishes and bowls to the kitchen. Then everyone settled into Michael's living room. The girls loved this room. It had a very high ceiling and long, elegant windows, and Michael had filled the room with enormous green plants and trees. It seemed so exotic. Tess sang her song first. She had chosen a tune called See You at Supper Time, and before singing, she put on a yellow bowler hat and a tie and grabbed Michael's umbrella from the corner for added effect. Everyone loved the song and clapped and whistled when she bowed. Then Lily stood up. I wrote a poem I thought would be perfect for winter, she said, and she read. The winter moon is large and white. The winter snow is soft and light. Winter trees are bare and brown. Winter birds are settling down. Winter rabbits curl up tight. Winter bugs all say good night. Winter winds blow deep and cold as winter stories are all told. I love winter, quiet and deep. Winter's here, the earth's asleep. After Lily finished the last line, everyone smiled. Wonderful, said Michael. Beautiful, said Aunt Lucy. I love good poems, Rosie said. It was so good it made me hungry, said Tess. Where are those puffs? Michael made tea, one of his usual strange concoctions this time, called cinnamon oolong maple zing. And Rosie handed out the pastry puffs on little saucers. Said Aunt Lucy, taking a bite. Perfectly perfect. Thank you, Rosie said, grinning. Once the puffs were eaten, Michael finally gave each cousin her little gift. Oh, my goodness, said Lily, a pink velvet rabbit for my collection. Thank you, Michael. Look, said Rosie, unwrapping her gift. A stained glass butterfly. It's beautiful. Thank you. I can't believe it, said Tess. Michael, where did you ever find a poster of the king and I? I love it. Michael smiled proudly at all the girls. And don't forget, there's something for you too, Michael, said Aunt Lucy, pointing to her little package on the table. Michael carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a book. Oh, this is incredible, he said, opening it slowly and examining the pages. A book on cacti, published in 1910, said Aunt Lucy. Aren't the illustrations beautiful? I'm overwhelmed, said Michael. It's perfectly perfect, said Tess. And the cousins grinned as Michael leaned over and kissed Aunt Lucy's cheek. I like winter solstice better than any other day of the year, said Tess. Short but sweet, said Lily. Just like us. And when the girls went back home to their attic, they opened up the blue book and wrote all about it.